right, tonight I am joined with Tate Casey. He is a former Gator player, 2006 and 2008 national champion, one of the stars of Swamp Kings, and currently the sideline reporter for the Florida Gator radio broadcast team. You can listen to him if you're choosing to mute your TV, which you should be doing. Tate, good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, good to see you, Allie. Appreciate you having me.
Of course. Thanks for coming. All right, we're going to jump right into it. Let's take it back to week one. What was the mood like on the sideline for the guys in the second half? Do you think that they seemed shell-shocked? Were they just totally, completely dialed in? Do you think they got kind of down? Like, what was the mood like down there?
I think, the initial, maybe first quarter, midway through the second quarter, I think that first big play, after that, I think everybody settled down a little bit. I think you tell maybe some first game jitters.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the defense settled in really well. And when you look at what they were able to do, especially when you talk about what we've seen out of Florida Gators defense in the last 3 years, I think third downs always come up in discussion. Third downs and red zone defense. And then on the flip side of that with the offense, third downs and red zone offense have been a big, really pain point, if you will, at times for Florida in the last 3 years. So looking at just those two stat lines, I think was a little bit of a hurting point for us in that game. And then when you combine that with third down procedural penalties and certain things that they went through in that regard, and then the special teams woes between a missed field goal and then filled in 2 punts inside the 5-yard line. There's a lot of things, and I always like to say you can look back to probably a handful of plays in that game that could have completely changed the course of momentum or changed the course of the game. And that's just the world we live in college football. I mean, I think that you can always do that, win, lose, or indifferent. So I think for us, we just got to kind of regroup. And last week, I think we saw that. Billy Napier took the accountability on himself and said, we're going to get it fixed. Last week was probably a curtain call to where Gator fans really want to see it, which is, the SEC matchups like Tennessee and LSU and some of these bigger games we've got coming up. But I think it's a good starting point.
So after the game, we lose, and I think Gator fans are upset, not necessarily that we lost, because I think that, at best that was a toss-up game, but more than likely that was a game we should have lost, just based on where Utah is. What was the locker room like, though? I mean, I know it was almost like the Gators beat the Gators instead of Utah, and I don't want to take anything away from Utah, but instead of Utah beating Florida, it seemed like we waited 9 months, to see some procedural errors, some really simple mistakes. Do you think that they, really realized, like, shoot, these are really correctable things that we can
Yeah, I do. And I think that, coach's message to the team afterwards was, we've talked about it, we've preached it. Now we just got humbled by it. Execution wins games, right? And I think that those small things matter. And, when you're transitioning from a coaching staff, I think that's the one thing that's preaches the small details. I know Urban was huge on details. It was the attention to detail, it was the preparation. I can see Billy Napier's big on that. And I not only can see that, I can hear it from players in post-game interviews and how they conduct themselves and how they talk and how they walk the walk. And I think for me is hearing Graham Mertz in the locker room after the post-game comments and doing the interview with him. We've got a lot of really, really good personalities, and they understand what's happening. But I think you're going to see a lot of turn of leadership too, especially out of Graham Mertz on the offensive side. I feel like Montrell Johnson is another one of those guys that, from a leadership standpoint, he's kind of gaining a lot of credibility after last season. I think EDN's going to be the same way if he wants to be one of those vocal leaders. You're starting to see some of those guys come out. And I think you're going to start to see that on the defensive side of the ball too. But, I think the one thing I saw after the Utah game in the locker room that I kind of took a step back and said, okay, it's been a while since we've seen that, is you see raw emotion out of players, whether it's guys in tears, the guys that are, just, for lack of better words, just pissed off, as opposed to just, well, there you go, there's another game, And so you can tell, I think it means a little bit more. I think these guys have worked really hard. And I think they're out really to prove a lot of people wrong this year.
All right. So we had that long break between Utah and McNeese State. Right before kickoff, what did you see out of the guys on the sidelines there before that one started? I mean, there's the opportunity for hangover there. It's a really long window of time between those two games? Were they just completely dialed in and ready to go?
Yeah, I think that the McNeese State, the approach, you could tell, I think they were itching to get back on the field. And let's be honest, they're not blind to everything that's talked about that's going on around them, right? Players are pretty smart guys. They kind of pay attention to things, whether it's for motivational purposes or kind of to carry that chip on their shoulder. I felt like this past week, didn't really matter who the opponent was. I think when you looked at them, the way they warmed up, the way they, came out and played, it was pretty evident that they knew they had to have a bounce back game and really kind of tighten up. And so, it was nice to see that. Take the opponent out of it. I think every Gator fan wanted to go to that game or watch that game and see a clean game, right? After all the procedural things, they didn't want to see Florida, dragging for scoring points and everything else. And they came out. I think Graham Mertz performed well. I think the offense performed well. I think you saw a defense that is slowly going to get better. And I don't know how slow or how fast, but they're going to progress game over game. And I think at times we've regressed on the defensive side of football. So that's kind of promising to see.
I thought it was a clean football game. There was, I believe, 4 penalties for 20 yards. Offense basically did whatever it wanted to, including a 99-yard drive. And the defense was good. I mean, solid. But it's one of those games where we wanted to see them beat a team they should beat the way they should beat them, which is always kind of step one of a rebuild, right? And you think about last year, USF week 2 should have in theory been the same thing, but it wasn't. So even though it's McNeese State, and I understand that, do you think that maybe this was a sign that things are slowly moving in the right direction?
I think it's a plus. I mean, I think it's hard to tell at this point. I mean, because you're only getting into game 3. But I think the one thing that you will notice is coaches use every moment they can for evaluation. And I think the best part about that game last week was kind of getting a little bit further into who can I trust when the bullets are really flying. And I think that you're going to see there's a couple of guys that really stand out in the last week or two, really in the first 2 games. But I think Trey Wilson's one of them. I think Trey Wilson's one of them. I think Castell's becoming a guy. I really think Shamar Moore and Scooby are going to come into their own in the linebacker position. And you see guys like Tyreek Sapp and then Cam Jackson and the guys in the middle. They've got a stacked front 7 if you can get them going, and they go hard. But I think there's another gear there that those guys are going to realize just really what it's about, that relentless effort on defense. But I think Austin Armstrong's the guy for the job because everybody loves him. Every player that plays for him loves him, and I think that's a true testament of a coach when you've got players that are really speaking your praises, whether the fan base loves you or not, or whether they're uncertain about you or not. I think there's plenty of guys that have had assistant coaches in their room that they'll go to bat for all day long, and it shows kind of on the production side.
He was the single biggest upgrade of the offseason, I think. All right, so the only area that I feel like we could probably have some complaints about is special teams. They were better week 2 than they were week 1, but as someone who is around the program and very close to it, tell me what your thoughts are on why special teams has been such a struggle for UF.
Well, I mean, the one thing you've got to look at, and I think that I really noticed this a little bit last week, was the young bodies that are on special teams. And it can be a blessing and a curse, right? You've got young guys that are getting first game experience. You've got freshmen out there that are getting first game experience, and they're trying to prove themselves. So I think that the down or the con to that is you're going to have some mistakes and some growing pains. I think we saw that with Trey Wilson in the first game, and even with Ricky Pearsall, fielding the punt inside the 5. Most fans will look at that and go, "Oh, I've heard that's a cardinal sin." And you're right, it shouldn't happen, but I think you're going to have some growing pains there. I think that it's also easy to look and go, "Man, our special teams is terrible at times." But what fans have to remember is we've been really, really blessed in the last 20, 30 years when it comes to place kicking and punters. I mean, as well as I do, from Eric to Chaz to all the guys, on the punt squad. And then you go look at the field goal place kickers that we've had in the last 10, 15 years. We haven't had too much headache at all.
Right.
And to me, I think that gets better from those 2 skill guys. But it's really the people around them that can make or break. And I think when you get into battlefield position, especially against the Tennessees of the world, the LSUs of the world, the Georgias of the world, and every yard matters. I think that's where we've really, really got to get tight, placing punts and making every possible field goal that we can. That's reasonable.
All right, guys, we're going to get back to Tate in just a minute. I know you are enjoying his interview, but it's been a minute since I've asked you guys to subscribe to the channel. We just hit 6,000 subs, so, we needed a new goal. So we want to hit 5 digits. Do you think we can do it by the end of the year? I'm pretty sure we can. 10,000. Let's do it. So if you are not subscribed, hit that button right now. You mentioned the Tennessees of the world. Well, they come to Gainesville this Saturday, obviously. Tell me your thoughts on the game. I think Joe Milton hasn't looked as good as people were, hoping after the bowl game last year. And I think that this game is looking a little bit more manageable than maybe it did after week 1.
Yeah. I hesitate to say
manageable.
I hesitate to say manageable because it's UF UT. You never know with this game. I think that the one thing, no matter what, the sense of urgency has to be there. And for me, watching from the sidelines and watching this team grow game to game, at least in the first 2 weeks, that's one thing that I think we've got to have. And it's a no-doubter for me, especially on defense, the standing up looking, at the sideline trying to get the calls in.
Yep.
You're going to get up against a good team like a Tennessee, a Georgia, and an offense that goes tempo, and they're on top of their game, and it's going to burn you, once or twice, especially with a lot of young guys back there. And so I think, one, that's biggest key for me is I want to see guys flying around the football, but I want to see them dialed in to where, boom, get the call, I'm on the ball, I'm ready to roll. And that's kind of the change I'd like to see out of the mentality or the body language.
Yeah.
As far as Milton and listen, they've got a good offense. I mean, they can run the football. They've got a lot of receivers. They're always tough on defense. But I think, in my opinion, I think that my focus is not as much on Tennessee's offense and Florida's defense as much as it is Florida's offense and Tennessee's defense. And I think that Graham Mertz is kind of that equalizer. Has he wowed us with passing touchdowns? No, not necessarily, but he faced a really well-coached Utah defense week 1 in his first game with Florida with a lot of young guys around him and missing an offensive center who's going to be back this week. But he doesn't get you in those dicey situations. And the one thing I really, really have come to appreciate about Graham Mertz in 2 games is he's not your typical 6'6", 250-pound, runs a 4.4, wants to make everything happen with his legs. He knows what he's capable of. And I think he's really good at managing the game between his ears, at least from what we've seen so far. So I trust and hold high faith that he's not going to go put you in situations where we're turning the football over. And in a game like Tennessee, that alone can beat you.
I think that Graham Mertz has really impressed people. I think that, everybody thought Billy settled for him, but I think that what we're seeing so far anyway is that he's a pretty decent evaluator of talent. Yeah. And Graham Mertz has been completely serviceable, which truly with the weapons that Florida has is really all that you need, right? To have a successful offense. Nobody's expecting Heisman numbers at this point, but if you can minimize mistakes, get the ball in the hands of your playmakers, that's pretty much the job this year, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody really expected him to come in and just be a gunslinger throwing for 40 touchdowns, but when you've got the talent around you at Florida, I think that you're going to surprise some people as long as you can deliver a ball. And people would talk about he doesn't have the arm strength we need and this and that. To me, I don't think that matters as much as the offensive line giving him 2.5 seconds to throw the football and really progress. Boom, 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 got my read, get rid of the football. He's done a pretty good job of that when he's had time. Now, I think Iguacan coming back this week is really, really going to help that offensive line kind of get back in their rhythm. And you're talking about an offensive line who's given up, 5+ sacks in the first 2 games. That's something that last year we didn't see hardly at all. And so we may have seen 5 sacks or less last year, if I'm not mistaken, on the offensive side of the ball. So we kind of got to get back to that nastiness. I know Montrell mentioned after the game last week he wants to see us get a little nastier, like a little meaner up front, a little more aggressive. But, this past week we were bodies on bodies. And I think when you evaluate offensive line and you're watching offense in the run game especially, if you're getting bodies on bodies and you're up at the second level covering up linebackers, between the three backs that you've got in the backfield with Florida right now, I don't think that's a bad thing, no matter how aggressive or maybe a little more finesse you are with those fits. So I agree with him, but at the same time, whatever gets our offensive linemen covering up bodies and giving them holes to run through, I'm all for it.
All right. Tell me your absolute favorite Florida-Tennessee memory.
Oh, man. I've got some good ones. 04 is out, so that was a rough one.
Yeah, it was.
It's funny because that was my first introduction to college football in the SEC. Right? The 04 game, the Dallas Baker penalty, we were talking about, man, maybe we got time to get back to Gainesville and go to Grog House. And, it's 2 minutes left in the game. And I kind of remember being shell-shocked on that field goal with Colquitt. And that was kind of like one of those games where you're like, all right, this is why this is such a big deal. The SEC, coming from a Texas guy, you hear about it, you watch Big 12 football, you watch SEC, and you may watch some Big 10, but you're used to watching like the Red River rivalry.
Sure.
And then you go to Florida, and there's Florida, Tennessee, Florida State, Florida, Georgia, and then Florida LSU was really taking off at the time. Mm-hmm. And so you start to understand like, oh, there's like 3 or 4 of these in a year at Florida. And that was my first taste of that. And it was terrible. And then we lose to Georgia that year. And the only shining moment was Florida State. But I think that for me, from a Tennessee game, I think 05 stands out because that was Urban's, like, his whole deal was we don't lose rival games and we don't lose at home. And that was step 1 of 3 to beating all 3 rivals that year and not losing in the swamp. And so that was one of our huge goals, and that's what we did. So that one rings out, and the crowd noise that game was phenomenal. Had a lot to do with how our defense played, had a lot to do with what we were able to do. And then I think 08 for me, on the road, Knoxville. The best part about that game, besides Brennan James just having his way with Tennessee always and just what we were able to do on offense, they left in like – I don't even think they made it past halftime. But like third quarter was just – I remember looking around the stadium going –
all the people filing out.
I was like, there's 10,000 Gators here, and there may be 1,000 Tennessee fans in the stands right now. Mm-hmm. And the only people you could hear are the Gators. Listen, you can go to 06. You can ask Eric. 06 was a great year because we had so much going into that year, and that was like the first true battle with a really good team. And Dallas Baker, Jamel Cornelia. You can rattle off name after name that made a huge play that game. But yeah, I think that 05 and 08 were probably just two of the most significant ones. 06 was probably the best overall experience because it was a tight game and it was loud.
That was a squeaker for sure. All right, before we let you go, I want to talk to you for a second about Swamp Kings. We watched it. I thought it was really, really well done. Kind of wished it was like 20 hours long because there's just so much more information that could have gone in there. Like I think about, it's a vivid memory for me, Eric, coming back from that first meeting with Urban, and like he was bought in from that moment, but like he did not want to like this guy going into it. And so like, what he was able to do there. I think his relationship with Donovan and what was going on with the basketball team at that time is also like, the puzzle, but there's just only so many hours, only Gator fans will watch a 20-hour Netflix special on this.
They could have easily done a 10-episode deal. They had a lot of content. There's way more content that they laid down in the interviews and everything else in the back behind the scenes footage. They easily could have done 10. I just think they had to cram it. They originally went from 1 to 4 episodes. So it's, it turned out great.
There's a tipping point where only Gator fans are watching, right? And when you're trying to appeal to the entire country.
I don't know. I've met a lot of Bulldogs and Florida State fans up here that
well, the tipping point's not 4 episodes because there are lots of people that want more, but I just don't. Well, there's 20 episodes.
Good luck with that.
People want more for sure. But tell me something that was left out that you think would have been awesome to have been included in
it. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of good stories. There's plenty of good things. It's funny because people always ask me for stories, and like the ones that I vividly recall are the ones that like you and your boys like have together. You know what I mean? Like those inside stories that I'm probably pretty sure no one once told,
You
or like,
know, on Netflix.
you know, in a sense, it's between us, and it's probably better left that way.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Like it makes me laugh because when James Bates and Warfel and those guys talk about Spurrier, it's cracking. It's always a joke. Like Spurrier always had some funny thing, and Urban was completely different. Right? He was dialed in. He was about winning, and that's what we bought into, and we were all minded that way. Um, I don't know if I have. I don't know if I have anything that was left out that I cared to have in besides just more of the testimony of behind the scenes. I will say, actually, I'll dial that back. The one thing that I think some of the older guys on that team would have appreciated is the '05 story, like the '04 to '05 transition,
Yeah.
the '05 offseason program.
Mhm.
And, I wasn't one of those veterans, but I was a, starter as a freshman coming into a, sophomore year with a coach who didn't really utilize the tight end. So I
Mhm.
had a lot of question marks on what my future was going to look like. And really everything that they were trying to do. And I was in baseball at the time and was listening to football. I was doing my workouts at 4:30 in the morning. And then I was doing baseball in the evenings. And like I had just a whole different dynamic going on.
Yeah.
But still doing mat drills, still doing that. And I think people want to talk about the mat drills being terrible in '06, '07, '08. The mat drills in '05 were probably the most. I mean, I know you've heard the stories, but that was something that completely changed the iron on
Mhm.
that team. And there was a huge reason when you got a bunch of guys that were really blue collar mindset. They had a lot of grit, right? We had a lot of dogs on the '06 team, and it wasn't just skill set. It was guys that showed up with a lunch pail ready to go to work.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about that, and between that and Chris Leak, right? Because I think Leak being whether he wanted to do it or not, it's a different story.
Sure.
I know
Sure.
they approached a lot of guys and asked, and some guys declined.
Yeah.
But even that being said, there's so much in that '05 story and the transition from '04 to '05 and that first year and some of the hurdles we went through.
Yeah.
That is what kind of made the '06 team what it was. And even the '05 guys that weren't there in '06 had a lot to do with that.
Sure.
And you look at the Jeremy Mincies of the world, and Todd McCulloughs and Lance Butlers and Mike DeGore's. When you look at a lot of those guys that really didn't get much satisfaction out of the University of Florida after 4 years, 5 years, they may have gone and won an Outback Bowl, but they didn't get to an SEC championship game. And for guys that went through that first off-season program to not win anything on the way out is really what makes that South Carolina game sting so much for a lot of us, especially the younger guys who wanted to send those seniors out the right way.
Right.
And we came a South Carolina loss away from going to Atlanta that year. And me personally, I think we had a shot because when you look at that season, we had some good talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's the foundation of those teams that came were those guys. Whether or not they got to see the fruits of their labor down the line, is different, but they did build that foundation for sure. Those were some fun times and some really, really tough and gritty guys. And from somebody who was there but not in it, if that makes sense, I felt like it was really great for all of you guys to kind of have the curtain pulled back a little bit and to see the hard work and the effort that really went in, because I think everybody wants to cheer on Saturdays and everybody, has an opinion or whatever. But when you watch your loved ones do this and know the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that really goes into creating these championship teams, you don't get lucky. You work hard.
Oh yeah,
You know,
no, yeah, and I mean, I always get caught in the mode when I do these interviews and podcasts and stuff because you've got so much in your mind that you want to answer a question on. So like just now, I dove right into the '04-'05 transition, and then it just automatically in my mind right now. I haven't even mentioned a guy like Reggie Nelson, right, and Earl Everett and Brian Crum. And you can go you can go
Darnell
down
Brown.
and down and down the list of guys that had a huge impact on '06 and '08 because
Mhm.
a lot of those guys recruited with
Yeah.
us, right? They hosted recruits. they had people bought in before they were ever on
I was
campus.
there on your recruiting trip,
I
Tate.
know. And you know how we recruited, right? When Urban came in, I think our mindset shifted, right? From when I was recruited, it was, you're going to love it. They tell you everything you want to hear. And this, with certain situations. And I had a whole thing that I was looking at with academics to, Florida versus Texas, like what's the differences. And certain,
Baseball
I
factored
had
in.
was it a dual scholarship for baseball, football? Like I had 20 different things that I had to check box. And,
Yeah.
Florida was one of those. But I think when you turn the page to Urban Meyer and the guys that actually hosted recruits for him and guys that we knew we had to have and how dialed Urban was with recruiting, I mean, you would get like a folder. This is this guy's background. Here's where he's from. Here's his mom's name. Here's what she's really, here's what she really wants for him. Here's what his dad wants for him. Here's, put it in a way that's good for the kid. Like, make sure you're smart about it, certain things. And I think for me, like recruiting guys like David Nelson and some of the guys that I was lucky enough to recruit that came, especially a Texas guy.
Yeah.
I think what changed the biggest portion of that was, hey, listen, like, forget what coach is telling you. Like, if you don't want to come here and work, like, don't even, effing bother. Like, go to Bama. Like you would have guys that was like, oh, well, I've got, offers from Notre Dame. And it's like, dude, we were all blue chips. We understand that. Like, I'm telling you, if you're so concerned about starting your freshman year, like the chances on this roster right now, absolutely slim.
Yeah.
Right. If you're willing to come here and work and sit a year, sit 2 years and then play for 3, then absolutely we want you, because we want some guys that are going to come in and they're not worried about ego. They're truly concerned about how we get to a championship. Like that's what we're all focused on right now. And so that was a cool thing. I think, Siler, his personality, you probably saw in the Swamp Kings, but he was one of those guys that knew how to recruit. And I don't know how he recruited Spikes, but I could only imagine him telling Spike, hey, you're going to sit for a year for sure. And then when I'm out of here, then you got a shot.
Then we'll talk. Well, I could actually think about Channing recruiting Siler is probably actually a funnier thing to think about too. Because
I don't know. Is it as funny as Casey Griffith and Todd McCullough hosting me? Casey, guys, I had my first beer ever on my recruiting trip to Florida. I had never had beer before. I drank a little bit of whiskey, maybe here and there on a recruiting trip. Got sick as a dog at UCLA because of it, and then came to Florida. And remember Casey Griffith telling me, he's like, "Hey, here's your drink," and it's a pitcher of beer. And me going, "I don't drink beer, man." And he's like, "Well, we only got $140 per diem for you, so you drink beer tonight."
You do now.
Like,
Well,
all right, let's make it
we had to
happen.
throw out a whole couch on Chaz Henry's visit, so
I'm pretty sure every single one of us has about 10 recruiting visits stories that we can give. Like I said, those are the ones that probably
those
not
are the ones.
made it in the doc.
We won't get into those tonight. Well, I so appreciate the catch up, hanging out with us, telling all your stories. And I know Gator fans are going to be excited to hear it. And we'll look for you on the sidelines on Saturday.
All right, sounds good. Go Gators. Hopefully, hopefully defense shows up, play a clean game on offense. I think Florida's got a chance to really go after this one, prove some people wrong.
All right. Well, let's hope. We're going to see it. All right. Go Gators, Tate.
Go Gators. Thanks, Allie.